you guys enjoyed the new intro music as requested. This is the second part of the August 2015 exam. So we'll go through each of these open response questions. You guys should have been able to check your answers in the first video. If you didn't, I would go back to that video to make sure that you check your answers. But we'll go over each of these. So first one, number 28, determine to the nearest minute. We talked about this in class today. The number of degrees in an angle whose measure is 2.5 radians. Well, if we have 2.5 radians and we want to change it into degrees, we have to multiply by 180 over pi. So let's first figure out what we get for that. 2.5 times 180 divided by pi is 143.2394, 143.2394, etc. But it says to the nearest minute. So that's going to require us to go into our calculator. I got to get rid of that right there. And go into the angle menu, which is above apps, and choose choice 4, arrow DMS. Press enter one more time. So 143 degrees, 14 minutes, and 22 point whatever seconds. Well, 22 seconds is not the midway point yet. 30 seconds would be the midway point. So we're going to keep this 14 minutes at 14 minutes because 22 seconds doesn't have us round up. So 143.14. Done. Okay, next question. Solve for x. Well, this is one of those problems where we can get a common base. The problem is 1 over 16. If we were just working with 16, 16 is, I believe, 2 to the 4th. So 1 over 16 is actually 2 to the negative 4th. If you press math, enter, enter, there's my 1/16. So 2 to the negative 4th, and then 2 to the 3x minus 1. Once the bases are the same, we can solve the equation that remains. Add 1, so you get negative 3. Divide by 3, so you would get x equals negative 1. This is not one of the types of equations that you have to check, so you're done. Oops, 30 must have been down here. There we go. Determine f composed with g at x in simplest form. So first we have to do g at x, which is x plus 1, and then we have to substitute that into the f function, which is x squared minus x. X squared minus x. But our x is now x plus 1. In order to do this, we need to fully multiply it by itself, which means we have to do x plus 1 times x plus 1. You guys by now should be able to multiply that pretty quickly. Here's the tricky part. We have to make sure we, whoops, too far, subtract the whole thing x minus 1, which means we need to subtract x and subtract 1. And make sure you distribute that negative 1 or distribute that subtraction sign there. So now combine your like terms. X squared, 2x minus 1x is x. 1 minus 1 is gone. There's your answer. Okay, next question. Probability of winning a game is 2/3, which means the probability that you lose a game is 1/3. Determine the probability expressed as a fraction, that's going to be important, of winning exactly 4 games if 7 games are played. So 7 games are played, we want to choose to win 4 of them. If we want to win 4 of them, well, the probability of winning a game is 2/3, we want that to happen 4 times, which means we'll lose 3 games. Okay? I'm going to try to type this in my calculator and see if it'll give it back to me as a fraction. 7 math NCR 4, open a parenthesis, use the fraction key to do this, 2/3 to the 4th, use the fraction key to do this, 1/3 to the 3rd. Press enter, and it does. It gives it back to you as a fraction in simplest form. 560 over 2187. Easy. 2 points. 32 must have been down here. In a circle, an arc length of 6.6 is intersected by an central angle of 2/3 radians. Determine the length of the radius. Well, this is our SOAR formula. They gave us the arc length, 6.6, right, because that's arc. This is the angle in radians, and this is the radius. So our arc is 6.6, our angle is 2/3 radians. We want to find the radius. Well, because you have a calculator, you could put divide by 2/3 and just do it in the calculator. 6.6 divided by, make a fraction, 2/3, 9.9. Or you could have multiplied both sides by 3/2. That's kind of the more algebraic way of doing it. Determine the length of the radius. It didn't tell us to round or do anything else, so there's your answer. Show that that is equivalent to sine squared. Well, this guy is a little tricky because he's probably based off of this formula. That one you need to definitely know. But if we want to get secant squared, well, secant squared is 1 over cosine squared. But if I divide that by cosine squared, I need to divide everything by cosine squared. Cosine squared over cosine squared is 1. Sine squared over cosine squared is tangent squared. And 1 over cosine squared is secant squared. But that's not what this says. This says secant squared minus 1. So we need to figure out how to get that. Well, if I subtract 1, tangent squared is secant squared minus 1. Okay? So I can replace this with tangent squared. But now we still have, oops, I'm using theta instead of x. Same thing, but now we still have to simplify that. Tangent squared is sine squared over cosine squared divided by secant squared, which is 1 over cosine squared. Let's keep, change, flip, and we can cancel our cosine squareds. Our answer is sine squared. So the tough part about that was remembering this Pythagorean identity, which you could always get from this one here, and being able to manipulate it. Let's go to 34. A summation. Nope, not a summation. Summation with 35. 34 is an algebraic equation. You could either get a common denominator or multiply everything by the common denominator of 4x. If we multiply by it, 4 over 2 is 2. So we're left with 2 times x times 5x, which is 10x squared. Here the x's will cancel. We've got a 4. Plus here the 4's will cancel, x squared. Now, if you prefer the way where you get the same common denominator for everything, I'll show you that way quick. Here the denominator was 2. We're going to make everything 4x. So from here to here, we multiplied by 2x. So we'd have to multiply this by 2x. That's where the 10x squared comes from. From here to here, we multiplied by 4. So we'd have to multiply this by 4. 1 times 4 is 4. That's where that came from. And from here to here, we multiplied by x. So we have to multiply that by x. That's where the x squared came from. Okay, so either way, either do it this way or just multiply by the common denominator. So now you can subtract the x squared. Excuse me. 9x squared equals 4. Then from there, I would suggest subtracting the 4 as well so that it's in standard form. And you should see that this is a difference of perfect squares. So to get solutions of 2/3 and negative 2/3, well, remember, this was a fractional equation. You've got to keep an eye out for the values that would make this fraction undefined. But in this case, the only value that would make that undefined is an x value of 0. Because we didn't get that answer, we don't have to reject anything. But if you have the time, do a full check in your calculator just to make sure. Now, from here, actually not from there, from here, You could have chosen to do this a little differently. Could have divided by 9 and then taken the square root of both sides. The problem I have with that is usually when people do that, they just write 2/3. If you're going to do it that way, you have to put plus or minus 2/3. So you still get the same two answers. Okay? You don't need to put both ways, obviously, but one way or the other. Okay, number 35, find the summation from a equals 1 to 4 of x minus a squared. So the first thing we're going to plug in is a 1. Then a 2, because this number tells us the first thing to plug in. That tells us the last thing to plug in. So we're going to stop when we get to 4. Okay. What's a little tricky about this one is you're not doing -1 squared. This is a minus sign. 1 squared is just 1. So you're doing x minus 1 squared, which is 1. X minus 2 squared, which is 4. X minus 3 squared, which is 9. And x minus 4 squared, which is 16. And because this is a summation, we need to add those all up. X plus x plus x plus x is 4x. 1, 4, let's see, 4 and 16 is 20. 1 and 9 is 10. So you'll get minus 30 when you add all those up. Again, pretty easy. You can't check this one in the calculator because there's 2 variables there. So that's why they gave you that question, so you couldn't just do it in the calculator. First 4-point question. Okay, we're finally into the 4-pointers. In a triangle, 2 sides measure 8 and 11, and they form an angle that measures 82 degrees. To the nearest tenth of a degree, determine the measure of the smallest angle in the triangle. Well, I don't really know which angle is the smallest until I know which side is the smallest. And because we don't have any pairs here, we can't do law of sines. We can, though, do law of cosines to find this side. Okay? Because 82 degrees is the only angle that I know, I need to start my law of cosines formula with x squared. In between, 8 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 8 times 11. These ones are the easiest law of cosines formulas to solve because you plug in all that stuff into your calculator. You get 160.505 something. Those are ugly 5s. And then you can take the square root of both sides, and that's what will give you an x value of 12.66, etc. I'm not going to round anything because that's not actually what the question was asking for. The question was asking for the smallest angle of the triangle. Well, now I can tell that that's the smallest side, so that means that this will be the smallest angle. We'll call it y. Now we do have a pair, though. We have this pair here. This 12.66 number that should still be sitting in your calculator, we'll have to go over the sine of 82, and 8 will go over sine of y. And we solve by cross multiplying. 12.66 whatever sine y equals 8 sine 82. Divide, divide. So because that number is still in your calculator, you should be able to do 12.66 whatever. Let's get that number actually so that I know what I'm talking about here. I got to type this whole thing in. Let's do this. Let's do it the right way. 8 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 8 times 11 sine of 82. Where did that come from? What am I doing here? Am I in degrees? Yes. 8 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 8 times 11 sine of 82. Oh, cosine of 82. Oh my gosh. Okay. Cosine 82. There we go. There's that 160 number. When I take the square root of that number, that's where I get that 12.66 number, 669, whatever. Then over here, I'm going to have to do 8 sine 82, then divide it by that number. So we get 0.156, etc. Sine of y is 0.156. If that's what sine of y is equal to, in order to find angle y, we have to do inverse sine of that answer. So we get 8.9938. Seems like a really small angle. I feel like something went wrong somewhere here. So I found it. I put 2 sine 82 right here instead of 8 sine 82. And then I need to divide by that 12 whatever number. Sorry about that, guys. So there's the divided by that. So my decimal shouldn't be the one I had before. Should be 0.625 something. 0.625. And then when I do inverse sine of that, this is going to make a little more sense. Inverse sine of that number, I'm going to get 38.705. That sounds more right. And let's go back and read where the question asked us to round this to the nearest 10th of a degree. So let me look back at my answer. Nearest 10th, 38.7 degrees. Next one, solve the equation algebraically. So we've got multiple terms here, starting with a cube. Got to do this by grouping. Left side has a GCF of x squared, leaves you with 2x minus 1. The missing factor here is a negative 4. So we get x squared minus 4 and 2x minus 1. But this can be factored further. It's the difference of perfect squares. And then when you set each one equal to 0, you get positive 2, negative 2, and positive 1/2. It's a pretty easy 4-point question if you know that you have to use factor by grouping. 38 is an absolute value inequality. First things first, we got to get the absolute value isolated, which means I have to add the x. So we're going to get less than positive x plus 17, or 17 plus x if you want to write it that way. And then we're going to treat this like an equation so that we can find our critical values. Once we know our critical values, then we'll put those on the number line and do some test points. So we need 2 cases here. One that's the same, and one that's equal to the opposite of this, negative x minus 17. Now we need to solve both of those. Subtract x and add 5. Divide by 2. Add x, add 5, divide by 4. So those are your 2 critical values. Let's throw them on the number line. Negative 3 is obviously smaller than 11. Now, did that have a less than or a less than or equal to? Just a less than. So we're going to put open circles at those 2 values. And then we need to test values. Always do your test points back into your original. One of the easiest numbers to test will be a 0. 3 times 0 is 0. Minus 5 is negative 5. Absolute value is 5. 5 minus 0 is 5, and that is less than 17. So we're definitely going to shade here. When you try to test something like 12 in here, it doesn't work, and negative 4 also doesn't work. So we're only going to shade right there. It didn't tell us that we had to use interval or set notation. I'm going to show you both. If you want to do set builder, or if it tells you you have to do set builder, values of x such that negative 3 less than x less than 11. If you prefer interval notation, you would just put parenthesis, negative 3, comma, 11, and another parenthesis. Either notation is fine in this example because they didn't tell you you had to use one or the other, but sometimes they will say use this notation, set builder or interval. I kind of prefer this. Okay, the last question, the 6-point question. You want to make sure that you put as much work as possible as you can in this 6-point question. There's a lot of room to get partial credit here. Okay? Now, unfortunately for you guys, it's a log equation, and I know how most of you feel about logs, but it's really not too bad. Where would that minus sign have come from between those 2 logs? Well, we know that that minus sign came from division. So I'm going to condense those logs back together using division. Now, what most of you probably want to do is just solve this equation. And if you do that correctly, you'll still get a good amount of of credit. You actually could get up to 4 points if you solve that equation correctly. That's not how we're going to do this problem. It's not how you're supposed to do the problem. We have a log on one side, we don't have a log on the other. So we need to change this into exponential form, which means we need to BAP it out. Our base is 2, our power is 3, and our answer is this. 2 to the third is 8. So we get 8 equals all that stuff. Oops, why am I putting a 2 there? 7x. So now we can put this over 1 and cross multiply. Why am I writing 10? I'm like losing my mind today. So 8 times 2x minus 10 is 16x minus 80. And then this obviously would be x squared minus 7x plus 12. But I want to get this equation so it's equal to 0. So I need to subtract this and add that. Cancel, cancel. X squared minus 23x plus 92. Now, when I was first doing this problem, I sat forever and ever and ever thinking about all the things that multiplied to 92. And then I realized in the question that it said to round to the nearest hundredth. That should be a huge hint that we're not really going to get very nice answers here. Nearest hundredth means our answers are going to have to be rounded. So we probably can just resort right to quadratic formula. And nobody told us we had to do it by factoring or had to do it by completing the square. So go ahead, use quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b, which would be positive 23, plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let's figure out what that stuff under the radical gives us. Negative 23 squared minus 4 times 1 times 92 is 161. Now, because we have to round anyway, I don't really care what square root of 161 simplifies to or doesn't simplify to. And it actually wouldn't simplify anyway, but it doesn't matter because we're going to just do 23 plus that. Oops, I need my square root though. I put squared. Let's delete that. Insert a square root. Oh boy, let me just clear this. 23 plus square root of 161 divided by 2 is 17.8442, 8442, etc. And then if I do 23 minus square root of 161 and divide that by 2, I get 5.1557, 5.1557, etc. Now, what did the question say to round to? It said algebraically to the nearest hundredth. So 10th, 100th, 10th, 100th. This one will be 17.84. This one will be 5.16. But we need to be sure to check. You can't take the log of anything that's negative. So luckily for you guys, you have a log base button on your calculator. I'm not going to do both values, but I'll do one of them. So the first thing, math, press up, go to log base. Log base 2 of x squared minus 7x plus 12. Well, we're going to do 17.84 squared minus 7 times 17.84 plus 12. Go out of that parenthesis. Minus math, log base, put a base of 2 again, of 2x minus 10, 2 times 17.84 minus 10. Press enter. 2.999617. Well, the equation was supposed to equal 3, but because this 17.84 is a rounded answer, we didn't get exactly 3, but isn't that really, really close to 3? So it does check. Same thing with the 5.16. Okay, so both of them worked. Both of them are your solutions. But again, pay attention to the rounding. Hundredths place, this 5 had to get rounded up to a 6 because of the 5 next to it. So I hope that you guys did pretty decent on this one, and I hope you feel ready for this Friday's test. Make sure that you get a good night's sleep, eat a good breakfast, come in with some layers. The building may be cold, and your ID, a pen. You can bring a pencil, but a lot of the test can't be done in pencil, only charts or graphs. And just good luck. Try to stay calm. Do the best that you can. Try not to leave any questions blank. Know that you have prepared for this as much as you possibly can. Okay? Good luck, you guys, and thank you so much for a great year. Hopefully I'll see you on Friday.